Welcome to Gambling with an Edge with your hosts Bob Dancer and Richard Munchkin. Bob Dancer is America's premier video poker writer and teacher. He's written 10 books, including Video Poker for the Intelligent Beginner and the best-selling $1 Million Video Poker. He helped develop the computer software Video Poker for Winners, and in 2004 he was inducted into the Video Poker Hall of Fame. Richard Munchkin has been a professional advantage player for over 30 years and is in the Blackjack Hall of Fame. His book, Gambling Wizards, Conversations with the World's Greatest Gamblers, is a testament to the many ways you can succeed at gambling. The goal of the show is that you'll be a more knowledgeable gambler tomorrow than you were yesterday. And now, here are Bob and Richard.
Good evening. Welcome to Gambling with an Edge. I'm Bob Dancer.
And I'm Richard Munchkin.
Our guest tonight is Eric Raskin, author of a new book from Huntington Press called The Moneymaker Effect, the inside story of the tournament that forever changed poker. We'll be talking to Eric in a few minutes. I'm supposed to be on a honeymoon right now, but we had to postpone it due to Bonnie's health. She has some sort of liver problem. It's serious stuff, but she's getting better, and the doctors expect her to recover almost 100%. There are a number of shows we pre-taped and were intended to run in this while I was supposed to be away. At the time we taped them, I was still planning on going on the honeymoon and said words to that effect on the tape. I know this will be a bit confusing because you're going to hear in a few weeks that I'm going to say I'm going to be on a honeymoon, but I'm sorry about that. We decided to do some live shows now because Richard will be filming a movie for a month starting the last weekend in June, and we want him free from having to do the show during that time period. Either that or he'll be playing a secret game somewhere. All right. Spoiler alert. In 2003, at the World Series of Poker, an unknown amateur with the unlikely name of Chris Moneymaker won the main event after entering a $39 qualifying tournament at the PokerStars online site. That was 11 years ago, and all our listeners know this. The book, The Moneymaker Effect, deals with the background of the World Series of Poker in that era, the status of Binion's Horseshoe in downtown Las Vegas, and some interviews with dozens of people, some of whom are household names in the poker community, and some you've never heard of. The author of that book, Eric Raskin, is here with us tonight. He is editor-in-chief of All In magazine and has received several writing awards from the Boxing Writers Association of America. Eric Raskin, welcome to Gambling with an Edge.
Thanks so much, guys. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm glad you gave that spoiler alert so people had a moment to turn off the show if they didn't want to know who won the 2003 World Series of Poker.
Yes, after 11 years, the word might not be out everywhere. All right, so we can delve into several parts of the book, and we could take well more than an hour, but that's all we got. Let's start off with a brief history of the World Series of Poker prior to 2003.
Sure. There's obviously a lot of ground to cover between when it started in 1970 down at Binion's Horseshoe, and then 2003 when things exploded with Moneymaker's win. But trying to focus on sort of the key moments. Obviously, the birth of the World Series in 1970 was Benny Binion hatched the idea, sort of spun from something he had done nearly 20 years earlier, the very famous poker game, the heads-up match between Johnny Moss and Nick the Greek. He saw how that attracted quite a lot of spectators and word of mouth, and got the Horseshoe name out there. And then in 1969, out in Reno, Tom Moore, the co-owner of the Holiday Casino, had an idea called the Texas Gamblers Reunion, sort of a chance for some of the best poker players in the world to get together. And Benny was invited to that. And so building off of that and his experience with Nick the Greek and Johnny Moss, in 1970 he decided to try something new called the World Series of Poker, where he invited all the top card players to come to his casino, play each other, crown a champion after several days of play, And what they did was essentially played cash games and at the end voted for who was the champion. And as the story goes, everybody playing in it got exactly one vote in their own handwriting. So they had to do a revote where you weren't allowed to vote for yourself. And Johnny Moss was voted the first world champion of the World Series of Poker. Starting the second year, Amarillo Slim Preston had the idea to do a freeze-out, a tournament, to determine the winner, and that's really the beginnings of something resembling the World Series of Poker main event as we know it. Those first few years, there were 6, 7 players, 8 players, 13 players. It was growing, but growing very slowly, and then they started adding side events in the third year of the tournament, and it was becoming bigger and bigger, but you're still talking, throughout the 70s into the 80s, the main event, you're getting 100 players, 200 players. When Johnny Chan famously won the World Series of Poker main event in back-to-back years in 87 and 88, the fields were, in the hundreds, between 100 and 200 each time. So it's still a remarkable accomplishment to win the same tournament back-to-back and finish runner-up the third year even. But again, you're talking about relatively manageable fields of players ponying up $10,000 to enter this tournament, the World Championship of Poker. And it continued to steadily grow throughout the 90s. Eventually it got to the point throughout much of the 90s where first prize for the main event was $1 million. In 2002, first prize was $2 million, and there were 631 entrants. So the World Series, again, had followed this nice, steady, slow, gradual growth for more than 30 years leading into 2003, where, again, there was nice growth, among the biggest growth that it had ever seen, about a 30% bump in field size from 02 to 03. But it was nothing compared to what was to come after what happened in 03.
Okay, good.
So I hope I hit on the key points there and tried to kind of give the history in a few minutes.
Yeah, we're trying to get some context, and I think you're providing that. Go ahead.
One of the things I found interesting, actually was very nostalgic for me, was in the beginning of the book, you talked to a lot of the old players. I know we're going to talk about Binions and sort of what Binion's evolving during that time, but a lot of the old players were talking about how different the tournament was back when it was in Binion's, and I started going to the tournament in the 80s, and it was such a different thing back then. It really seemed like I don't know, everybody seemed to know each other, and it was definitely a very different feel than it is today.
Yes, one of the people I interviewed, described it as an annual reunion of old friends certainly prior to Becky Binion, Benny's daughter, taking over things. I believe that was in 1998, if I remember correctly. Prior to that, when Jack Binion was running it, it was certainly known for everyone on staff knowing your name if you played in it being a real personal thing. And I guess the key to point out is that it wasn't about making money for the casino. The rake was small. It was generally sort of an expansion on the original idea of gaining publicity through the World Series of Poker. It was never, in any casino, as you guys know, the poker room is rarely going to be one of the big money makers. It's there to make the customers happy and hope that after they play poker, they'll go play the table games. So I think that applies to the World Series of Poker as well throughout that era.
By the time this took place in 2003, the Horseshoe was getting pretty shabby. It had been a star of downtown during the Benny Binion era, but it was faded carpet and a whole bunch of stuff by the early 2000s. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, you guys probably, I presume, actually spent some time there in that era. I must admit, I never set foot in Binion's until after the poker boom began, so it's all through the secondhand stories and the recollections that people shared with me. But in the book, some of the the best stories pertaining to that came from Nolan Dalla, who was and actually still is the World Series of Poker media director, but he just became the media director in 2002, and so the 2003 World Series was his first. And he had some fascinating things to say about the state of Binion's, and that famous carpet with the horseshoes on it, with that there were giant tears in it. The carpet was 20 years old, and they hadn't replaced it, and that everybody working there knew what that meant. That money was tight. People were afraid, nervous about whether they were actually going to get paid. It was a sinking ship. Nolan had this great quote about how working the World Series that year was like being on the deck of the Titanic and in a three-ring circus at the same time. And he basically said that they dealt with the holes in the carpet by covering them up with giant, ugly pieces of duct tape, and he just said that was the clearest sign there could be that this casino was not anybody's baby anymore. Nobody cared that much about it. If it's your baby, you put money into it to make it look nice. They were just patching it together. So that sort of gives you a sense of the state of affairs, financially. I think that applied to a lot of downtown Vegas in that era, that financially things were going in the wrong direction. Binion's Horseshoe was no exception, and just sort of the future of the casino and the future of the World Series of Poker was all very much in doubt coming into the summer of 2003.
ESPN is known for sports. They had delved into telecasting poker tournaments a little bit before, and but this was the first year they did something really special, and that had probably as much to do with the popularity of poker on TV as Chris Moneymaker. How did that go down?
Yeah, and it's that sort of gets to the overarching topic of the book, is what led to the poker boom, and it ultimately was this three-pronged thing. Chris Moneymaker, online poker, which we haven't really touched on yet, but I'm sure we will, and ESPN and the whole card camera. Those three things all coming together at once, and people will argue about what percentage they might ascribe to each of the three, but those were the three things that led to this explosion. And ESPN's involvement, they had televised World Series of Poker final tables before. If the listeners have ever seen the movie Rounders, they certainly know the famous Johnny Chan versus Eric Seidel hand that was broadcast on ESPN, that Matt Damon's character is watching and studying, where Chan sets the trap and wins the World Series. So it was televised. It was out there many of the years between the 70s, 80s, 90s, and so forth. But it wasn't a quality telecast. It wasn't, in the opinion of most people, a remotely entertaining or watchable telecast, because there were whole card cameras. You didn't know what cards any of the players had. If you've ever watched live poker, just sitting in the stands watching a tournament, and I say this as someone who is passionate about poker, loves the game, it can be incredibly boring to watch live, because unless you're really rooting for someone, sweating somebody, it's not that entertaining if you don't see the whole cards. You have no insight into what people are attempting to do, what their strategies are, when they're pulling off bluffs, when they're making bad laydowns, and so forth. That's what poker on TV was prior to 2003, but actually it dates back to the mid-'80s, that a gentleman by the name of Henry Orenstein, an inventor who is best known for inventing the toy Transformers, but his second best-known invention is the whole card camera. He came up with this idea of creating a poker table with little lipstick cameras installed at each seat, so that when the player looks at his hole cards, a camera will pick them up and a viewing audience will know what each player has. And he got a patent on it, and they actually started using it for some TV shows in England a bit in the late 90s, and it finally came over here to the States just prior to the '03 World Series, the World Poker Tour, which at the time was broadcast on the Travel Channel.
Why did ESPN wait so long to use that?
That's a great question. I don't know for sure whether it had to do with Henry Orenstein's patent and reluctance there, or I think based on my talk with ESPN executives, it was largely a case where these World Series of Poker broadcasts were not something they were taking all that seriously to begin with. They were getting a 1 hour or 2 hour show with a final table. The popularity of poker was not clear to them at that point. So I would think more than anything it was just sort of why do we want to create a big production out of this? And they hadn't really considered expanding the broadcast and using whole card cameras. I think it was more coincidence than anything that the World Poker Tour had started up just before ESPN decided to make this big commitment in '03. I don't think it was that they saw the WPT going and decided to follow suit. I think the wheels were already in motion over there, and it was just kind of coincidence and timing and a sense that post-rounders coming out on video and it becoming sort of a cult classic, and online poker getting started a little bit, that there was a sense that poker was turning into a bit of a thing, and they decided finally to make a real commitment that year. Use the whole card cameras, sign a multi-year deal with Binions, you really try to produce it the right way, make a lot of episodes out of it, and it all just kind of came together at once. Although, as people talk about in the book, at the last minute, there was a concern that the Nevada Gaming Commission was going to shut down the use of whole card cameras and ruin the whole thing. And it took sort of a last minute plea from Phil Hellmuth of all people to convince them that to make this happen, that they need to do it. And thankfully, the day before the main event started, finally they got clearance to use the whole card cameras.
That's a pretty amazing piece of trivia that Phil Hellmuth was may have been the guy who swayed that. But I would argue that the WPT had as much to do with this poker explosion as Chris Moneymaker winning the main event did. I mean, before the Moneymaker ever happened, WPT, I mean, people that I had never had mentioned a word about gambling to me before suddenly were watching poker on television, before this happened on that WPT
right.
shows.
I think that's a valid case. I don't think it was nearly as big as the World Series of Poker and ESPN and all that, but I think it was a key sort of first domino to knock the second domino over, make it all possible. It didn't bring it in my sense mainstream in the way that ESPN did, largely because of just the channels that you're talking about, the Travel Channel versus ESPN televising something in prime time. That, the WPT built that awareness, showed that it could be done, showed that there was an audience for this. When the main event of the World Series of Poker started airing, I guess about 4 months after the World Poker Tour started airing, that's when it became more of a sort of a situation where, wow, everybody's watching this, everybody's talking about it. It's your water cooler talk at work on Wednesday. Did you see the latest episode last night? It took it to that next level, but certainly the World Poker Tour kind of raised the awareness and got the ball rolling to set things up for the WSOP.
All right. Let's look at Chris Moneymaker himself. Who was he, and how did he get involved into this tournament?
Well, he was, of course, an amateur poker player, really an online poker player for the most part. He was a 27-year-old accountant. They always referred to him as an accountant on TV because it was kind of the easiest way to do it. But what he was sort of a comptroller / accountant for 3 restaurants in Tennessee. A young guy married with a newborn baby, making like $32,000 a year, still paying off loans and debts, and struggling to get by. Had long been into sports gambling. He and his dad actually shared a sports betting bankroll for a lot of years. And then he started playing a little poker at the local casinos in the Tunica area, inspired largely by rounders, like so many people were around that time. Started playing No Limit Hold'em, started playing online at Poker Stars, and of all the amazing little coincidences or random bits of luck that fell into place over the course of Moneymaker's run to the World Championship, I think maybe the most incredible thing of all is the story of how he entered the satellite tournament to win his seat in the World Series. That he had about $60 left in his Poker Stars account. He had just had a big cash out because he needed to pay some bills, so he didn't leave himself with too much money. And if you've ever played online sit-and-goes, which, of course, are the tournaments where it's a set number of seats, and once those seats are filled, the tournament starts. Anyone who's played online poker, like I have, knows when you see one that's almost filled, you just hurry up and click on it if it's in your price range because you want to get that seat before you have to wait for a whole nother sit-and-go to get started. So Chris clicked on Poker Stars. He saw a tournament for $39 with 17 out of 18 seats filled. And he just hurried up and clicked on it and didn't take a close look, didn't realize that it was not a cash tournament, but rather a satellite to another satellite to win a seat in the World Series of Poker main event. I barely knew what the World Series of Poker was at that time, and as he told me for the book, if I'd known it was a satellite, I never would have played it. As it happened, he clicked that button, got that 18th seat, played that, won that satellite. Then played.
But if that's true, couldn't he have chosen to take the $10,000 instead of the seat?
Well, it's funny when he won. So he won the first satellite, which got him a qualifying seat in the larger satellite, and you couldn't just cash out of that. You would just want a ticket to the larger satellite. So then he was playing the larger satellite, which was based on the number of players in it. The way it worked out was there was enough money in the prize pool for the top 3 places to get World Series of Poker seats. 4th place gets $8,000. And back then, the seats were not transferable like they became later. That yes, you could just take the cash instead of the seat in later years. At that time, you couldn't. You had to. You couldn't redeem the cash. You just had to go out to Vegas and get your seat in the main event. And then technically, it was $11,000, $10,000 entry plus $1,000 spending money. So anyway, he was getting late in that tournament. 5 players left, and he needed money. He was not playing. He didn't care about a World Series of Poker seat, and he started trying to lose some chips and bust in 4th place and get that $8,000. And a friend of his was watching him play on Poker Stars and called him up and said, "What the heck are you doing?" And Chris said, "I don't want the seat. I don't want $1,000. I want $8,000." And his friend convinced him to take a shot, and his friend offered to buy half his actions. I'll pay you $5,000 if you go ahead and win that seat, and if you cash in the tournament, I get 50% of your winnings. So Chris said, "All right, the difference between $5,000 and $8,000 isn't that huge. All right, I'll go ahead and do that." And then, as it happened, his friend later backed out, didn't have the money. Chris went and got other backers. His dad bought $2,000 of him. Another friend, amazingly named David Gamble, bought $2,000 of him. A couple other guys bought $500 each, and Chris got his $5,000 no matter what happened at the World Series. But just a remarkable story of how easily things could have gone differently, and Chris Moneymaker never would have played that tournament.
Did you get a chance to interview the guy who could have had half of him and backed out?
I'm sorry, what'd you ask?
Did you have a chance to talk to the guy who could have had half of him and backed out?
Right. Yeah. I wish I had. It's funny. His name was Bruce Peary, And when I interviewed Chris, he was obviously the backbone interview of the books. I interviewed him for a few hours. At the end, I was, trying to round up contacts of other people I wanted to talk with. Chris gave me, phone number for his dad, phone number for his friend David Gamble. But apparently he and Bruce Peary had a big falling out. Chris said that Bruce owed him like $40,000 at some point later and never paid him, and they hadn't spoken in years, and he didn't have any contact information for him. And I tried to find him on LinkedIn and Facebook and stuff like that, and couldn't identify the right guy. So I was unfortunately not able to speak with Bruce Peary. He was out there at the main event with Chris. He was there watching him win it, and I'm sure sitting there thinking, wow, $1.25 million of that 2.5 could have been mine. So his story is an interesting one that unfortunately I was not able to really tell in the book.
Wow.
Okay, the tournament itself. It's there were 839 players. It's the highest ever up to that point, although later year the number skyrocketed. It's listed as a 5-day event, which is much shorter than the current situation. For about, say 10 minutes, let's take us through the first 4 days of how Moneymaker's fortunes ebbed and flowed during that tournament.
Sure. Now, the important thing to know here is this was his first live tournament that he'd ever played in. He'd played some live cash games in Tunica, and he played online tournaments, but he'd never played a live tournament before. Other than when he got out there in Vegas, he played a few live satellites, used some of that $5,000 cash to get a little practice in and get a sense of how it would work. So he sat down at that tournament, and as he described it to me, incredibly nervous, butterflies in his stomach, could barely move, until about 10 minutes in when he sort of realized, oh yeah, this is poker. It's kind of boring for a while. There's not that much to do if you're not getting hands. I can just sit here and fold and relax and figure it out. And he did loosen up. And his day one starting table, interestingly, had one other noteworthy name at it, and that was Dan Harrington, the 1995 world champion, who actually went on to finish third in 2003. So among the final 3 players out of 839, 2 of them were at the same starting table there on day one. But Chris had no idea who Dan Harrington was. He tells the story that at some point, an hour or two in, Harrington raked in a nice pot, and one of the other guys at the table said, nice hand, champ. And Chris was like, I wonder what that's all about, and got up and walked away from the table and looked at the pictures on the wall of the past champions and said, oh, that guy, Dan Harrington. Oh, had no idea. So that kind of shows you how little Chris Moneymaker knew about the poker world when he came out there to play. But his experience those first couple of days was incredibly positive and consistent with the way that, as he said to me, he only had 1 2-hour level the entire first few days of the tournament where he finished the level with fewer chips than he started it. So he was just consistently chipping up, staying out of trouble, catching some of the right cards at the right time. He mentioned on the first day that he had pocket 7s against pocket aces, saw a flop, flopped a set of 7s, and busted the guy who couldn't get away with his aces. Had another hand where I believe he had pocket aces against ace-queen, and flop came ace-high, and or maybe it was queen-high, and he got it all in again and won a couple of huge pots just by kind of being on the right side of the deck, and otherwise staying out of trouble, being conservative. He said he wasn't doing much bluffing at all, except for a standard continuation bet here and there that he would, if he was the raiser before the flop, he would always fire the first bet after the flop to see where he stood. But if anybody played back at him and he didn't have a real hand, he just folded. So it was kind of a smart, for a relatively limited player, a smart, tight, aggressive strategy in order to not get yourself into trouble. And that's really the way his first couple of days went, with the exception, he said, of on day 2, sharing a table with Johnny Chan and Phil Ivey, one of whom was already a legend in the game, one of whom was soon to become a legend in the game, and specifically Chan gave Chris fits. He felt like every time Chan played with him, he always felt like Chan had it. He was getting bullied around and did lose some big pots there, but righted the ship and kept chipping up and came into day 3, the day when the money bubble would burst, as off the top of my head here, I believe it was the 26th biggest stack out of a little over 100 that were left in the tournament. So in pretty good position to make the money, which was pretty well beyond his wildest dreams when he started, and certainly his baseline goal when he started. If he could min cash for $15,000, he would have been thrilled. And so that became his goal on day 3, and that's where the ESPN cameras really first started tracking the Chris Moneymaker experience, because he was seated at the featured table, the one with the whole card cams, because he happened to be at a table that had Johnny Chan and Howard Lederer at it, along with some other semi-noteworthy pros, Paul Darden, Kenneth James, and so forth. And there's the very famous hand that if you've seen it, you'll never forget it, where Moneymaker didn't even realize he had cards in front of him. He thought he'd folded, and Chan and Lederer are staring him down, and he's staring them down, or it appears he's staring them down, when in fact he just doesn't realize they're all waiting on him to act, and it's this great, embarrassing, hilarious situation. And Chan tells him afterwards, don't worry, kid, they'll never show that on TV unless you win the tournament. So we all know how that turned out. But and he had some really memorable hands there on day 3 at that table that he busted Johnny Chan right heading into a break. A lot of the players had already left the table to go on their break, and Moneymaker, had Chan drawing really thin, and Chan got it all in, and Moneymaker busted him. And that was kind of the point at which the ESPN crew started realizing this kid with the last name Moneymaker, who just busted Johnny Chan and is in the money at this point, or near at that point nearing the money bubble with a pretty big stack. This is a real story here. This is someone we need to follow. And some of the other key hands along the way.
Actually, we're running out of some time,
sure,
so let's
sure.
go to the final table, which is they're
sure.
down to 9 players. So let's take about 5 minutes on the final table and some of the stuff that happened there.
Yeah, the other, Chris was by far the least experienced, least respected player at the final table. He was, Sammy Farha, who ultimately finished in second place, said Chris was the one guy at the table he didn't even give a second thought to, even though Moneymaker came in as the chip leader. Nobody was really giving him much of a chance. And he pretty much stayed out of the way early. Amir Vahidi took over the chip lead.
What was he thinking about when he knew, okay, I'm going in, tomorrow is the final table? Mm-hmm. What was his thinking like at that point?
He was surprisingly confident. He had actually told his father that he believed he was going to end up in the final 2. He had the chip stack to get there, and he believed that the other 2 most dangerous players at the table were Farha and Amir Vahidi, and he said they're going to play a big pot, and whoever wins is going to be up against me in the final 2, and it came true just like that Amir Vahidi bluffed off a lot of his chips to Sammy Farha. He went broke, and Moneymaker, for the most part, was just kind of treading water at that final table until there were 3 left. At which point, again, Moneymaker and Sam Farha, cash game veteran, and Dan Harrington, a former world champ, were the last 3. And that's where, 4.5 days, long days with not a lot of sleep in between, especially for Farha, who was supposedly at the end of the tournament every night at 2 or 3 a.m. when the tournament would end, went straight into a cash game and played that until the next morning when the tournament began, and claimed he didn't sleep for 5 days. I don't know if that's a slight exaggeration, but in any case, older guys, and Moneymaker, age 27, really focused, had all this energy that the 2 of them didn't, and he started turning up the aggression and really running over the table with 3 players to go, playing by far the best poker of his life. He was just in the zone. And eventually he busted Dan Harrington, setting up, what is probably the most famous heads-up match in tournament poker history, and what ultimately would contain the most famous hand in televised poker history, the great Chris Moneymaker bluff against Sam Farha.
Now, when it got down to 2, Chris had the chip lead, right? But I mean, everybody just thought it was a foregone conclusion that Sammy Farha was going to win. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It's fascinating now to look back on that because it seems kind of crazy that you'd consider the guy who's ahead 2-1 in chips to be a big underdog. But that's how people viewed it. They couldn't imagine how Chris was going to beat Sammy Farha in a heads-up. And Chris and Sammy did talk about making a deal, so a chop of sorts. That Chris said he was feeling great, wasn't really considering anything like that until they brought all that cash out there. They brought $2.5 million out, the first place prize, and plunked it down on the table. And suddenly it hit Chris what he was doing and where he was out here at Binion's in Vegas and getting late in the night. And he said, Sam, maybe we ought to talk about a deal here. They went off in the bathroom, talked about splitting the money evenly and just playing for the bracelet. And Sammy said, no, you're going to have to give me a little bit better than half the money if we want to do that. He actually even said something to the effect of, why don't we just play for all the money? The $2.5 million and the $1.3 million for second place. Let's play for $3.8 million, and loser goes home with nothing. And Chris obviously wasn't interested in that deal at all, and so they couldn't work out any kind of a deal. Which again, good news for Chris that Sammy wasn't willing to negotiate with him, because then they came out there, and that conversation gave Moneymaker a sense of how Farha was going to play against him, that he was so confident that he was better than Chris, that he didn't want to make a deal, that he was so confident he was going to win despite a 2-1 chip deficit, that told Chris that Farha was going to want to avoid getting into real big pots. He would want to play small pots, not take big risks, and just outplay Chris and whittle him down. And of course, as Chris explains it, that set the stage for the big famous bluff where Chris went all in on the river with nothing, figuring that Sammy couldn't call him because it would ultimately be more prudent to fold and try to beat Moneymaker winning small pots rather than risk losing it all right there in one big pot.
All right, so Chris won.
Yes.
What? And that was 2003. We got 7 minutes. What happened afterwards to Chris? What happened afterwards to poker?
Well, the numbers really tell the story. 839 players in the main event in 2003. A few people tried to make predictions what 2004 would hold. Everyone was thinking, wow, we're going to cross 1,000 players. Howard Lederer wrote a blog predicting 1,100. Instead, the numbers, 2,576 players at the 2004 World Series of Poker main event. The field tripled in 1 year. And the sense is that because of the whole card cam and because of online poker, poker was going to explode no matter who won it in 2003. But a lot of people said maybe it would have doubled. It was not going to triple if not for Chris Moneymaker and all the people who watched him on ESPN and thought, I could be that guy. I could do that. I'm an amateur. I could go on a great run for 1 week. The ratings that ESPN got were so far beyond what they could have imagined. And if you were watching ESPN at all during that time in the summer of 2003, you remember that it wasn't just Tuesday nights. It was all through the week, replays over and over, middle of the afternoon, middle of the night. They just couldn't play the show, these poker broadcasts enough, and they kept getting quality ratings and generating ad dollars wherever they put it. So it just was this incredible, the Moneymaker Effect, as it's called. That it just led to this amazing boom where the field size again tripled in a single year. By 2005, it was over 5,500 players in the main event. It doubled again, and in 2006, 8,773 players. So in 3 years, it multiplied by a factor of 10 over what it had been the year that Chris Moneymaker won it. Just amazing the way that poker exploded. And then, of course, things did level off and even tail off because of the U.S. government getting involved in trying to shut down online poker with the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act of 2006, and eventually what's known as Black Friday in 2011. They made online poker less accessible and then fully inaccessible for U.S. players, and that has led to a sort of a cooling off of the poker boom until now that it's starting to come back again with state-by-state legalization. But that's really what happened to poker afterwards and what the Moneymaker Effect describes, this every average Joe coming out and giving it a shot and believing they could be the next Chris Moneymaker. As for Chris and what happened to him, he was able to parlay that one win into now 11 years of sponsorship deals. He still represents Poker Stars all these years later, wears their logos, gets a nice solid check in the mail every month to do that, and is a professional poker player. He's not an overwhelmingly successful one. Nobody considers him one of the elite players. He doesn't consider himself one of the very best in the world. But he's a good player, a winning player. He's had a couple nice scores since then. But he finished second in the NBC heads-up tournament one year and so forth. So he's made an okay living out of playing poker and a nice living out of being an ambassador for poker and for Poker Stars.
So he quit his accounting job. He no longer does that. He just plays poker for a living?
That's correct. He was initially planning to go back to work and did go back to work that Monday, Memorial Day Monday after he won. He even went into work, which the guys who wanted him to sign a deal with Poker Stars took that as a bad sign. But they eventually convinced him, go on the road, give this a shot. You'll never have another opportunity like this, and he did. He quit his accounting job. It ultimately led to his divorce. He got remarried not too long thereafter, and has a nice stable family life now. But yeah, it was huge changes in his life, and one thing that we kind of forget as well, when he went out to play that World Series of Poker in 2003, not only was he not really dreaming realistically of winning $2.5 million. He also, it had never crossed his mind that he could become famous. There was no such thing as poker celebrities, other than just what was beginning to happen a little bit with the World Poker Tour airing. But, the idea of going out there and becoming a celebrity through poker was so completely foreign to him, and yet that's what happened. He had, he was on David Letterman within a couple weeks after winning the World Series. So it's just this amazing transformation of the game going mainstream in a way that nobody could have imagined it would.
Very good. We're talking to Eric Raskin, author of the book The Moneymaker Effect. We're going to do some commercials now, and then after the commercials, we're going to ask Eric about some of the people he interviewed for this, and he had their quotes. One of the most curious ones, perhaps, are the brother-sister of Howard Lederer and Annie Duke, who have both had their share of scandals recently, and on their participation in this project. So we'll be doing that in just a few minutes. The South Point has more than 10,000 games, returning more than 99%. That's more than anyone else. In June, there's going to be a gift of the week each week from Sunday through Wednesday. You earn 400 slot points or 800 video poker points in one day, and then go pick up your gift at the Players Club. The gift for the first week, which starts this Sunday, is a tote bag with blanket. On Thursdays in June, you earn free buffets. Earning 600 points gets you a free dinner. Earning 300 points gets you a free lunch. If you earn the first 300 points before 1 p.m., then you get both lunch and dinner for the 600 points. At the Palms, tomorrow night is the last $10,000 drawing for May. And then starting after that 7 o'clock drawing, you may begin earning entries for next week's drawings, which is in June. They're also going to be $10,000 each week. At the current time, we have no details other than that. You will earn 5 times drawing entries Friday and Saturday evenings from 8 to midnight, 2 times drawing entries all day, Sunday and Tuesday. PFP, play for points, Monday through Friday. Through tomorrow, you may earn Costco gift cards. Starting Monday, for the first half of the month, you may earn Kohl's gift cards. That's Kohl, or clothing store. Videopoker.com remains the best place to practice a wide variety of games, including Quick Quads, Ultimate X, Extra Draw Frenzy, Hyper Bonus, and many others. Often these games are the best returning games in a casino, and you need to practice to make sure you know how to play. This week's weekly contests are Ultimate X, Super Triple Play, and Spin Poker. Tonight, let's look at Super Triple Play. This is a 6 coins per line game where you receive extra for certain high-paying hands. In Double Bonus, for example, all 4 of a kind receive double payout, and the straight flush goes from 250 to 700. For the 9-6 version of Double Bonus, Super Triple Play, the game goes from 98.98% to 99.11. So that's 0.13% more. But the variance skyrockets. Double Bonus starts out with a variance of 42. Super Triple Play version is 118. For a lot of players, the regular variance of Double Bonus is pretty scary. The Super Triple Play version is extra scary. You need to wear a seat belt and 2 seat belts, a belt and suspenders, I guess. Don't attempt to play the game using regular Double Bonus strategy or what feels natural. 3 card straight flushes are much, much more valuable than your intuition tells you they'll be, simply because you get 700 when you get the straight flush rather than the normal 250. For example, a 5, 6, 7 of hearts with a black 8 and, say, a black 3, the correct play is still 5, 6, 7. This is an unusual play. 5, 6, 7 is not as valuable as a pair of 10s. Now, you wouldn't know these unless you actually looked them up. Also, hands such as King, 7, 7. When you get double pay for 4 kings, do you hold the kings or do you hold all 4 of them? The correct answer is you hold all 4. But you're not going to know this for sure unless you check it out. Now, the strategy isn't particularly difficult, and there are tools out there to make it easier for you, such as Video Poker for Winners, but going in blind is not a good idea. All right, let's go back to Eric Raskin and talking about his book, The Moneymaker Effect. Your book had quite a few famous players being interviewed, including brother and sister, Howard Lederer and Annie Duke. Both of them have been scandalized with some rather serious accusations. Did either or both of them say something like, I'll talk about Moneymaker in 2003, but I will not talk about blah, blah, blah? Anything like that? Go on.
Well, I beat him to the punch on that. That was how I positioned it in order to get the interview. I started with Howard because he went very deep in the tournament, finished 19th that year. I considered him pretty close to an essential interview, and he, as people probably know, was one of the founders of Full Tilt Poker, which was mired in scandal following the Black Friday Department of Justice coming down on online poker in 2011 that Full Tilt wasn't able to pay their players, had misappropriated the funds, and so forth. So Howard was and remains an absolute pariah in poker, probably the most hated man in the game. I had his email address. I had known him a bit, although it had been a couple of years since we'd spoken. I shot him an email, and I positioned it as, I'm writing the oral history of the 2003 World Series of Poker. I will not ask you any questions about Full Tilt. This is not an interview about that. I'd really love to interview you just to talk about the summer of '03. And he emailed right back and said, sure, let's do it. And this was, as it turned out, the very first interview that he did with any media member post-Black Friday. It had been about 14, 15 months of total media silence from him. Prior to that, I got the first interview with him, and he was great. He was, to me, one of the most fascinating interview subjects in the book. And, as I was talking to him, I said, I asked, I didn't have Annie's contact information. I said, could you give me her email address or reach out to her and ask her if it's all right if I interview her? And so he hooked that up, and so it was sort of, didn't even have to explain in that case, I won't ask any questions about the Epic Poker League and everything that went wrong there. Just want to talk about the 03 main event. That was pretty well understood. So, but it's been funny, the reaction to it since, first, the original article ran on Grantland.com, and now that the greatly expanded book has come out, that a lot of poker people are somehow very angry to see their names in there, especially Howard's, that I'm seeing comments already, great book, but I can't believe you interviewed that scumbag Howard Lederer should have done it without him. And to me, I just say, it's a history, and he was part of the story, and if you want to think of all of his quotes as possible lies because you don't believe a word he says, that's up to you. But he's just recalling what happened and has fascinating insights into what this tournament meant to him and the other players in 2003.
Eric Seidel is a major, he's had a lot of accomplishments in poker and other games. When he first heard about the whole card camera, he was adamantly opposed to it. Eventually, he relented. How did that work out? Was he? Were you able to talk to him?
Yeah, I mean, he's great. He's always been very media friendly. I didn't know that about him.
Not to us.
I'm sorry. Say again.
I'm just saying we've tried to get him for the show a number of times. And
okay. So he, I should say, is sometimes media friendly. Then I'll amend my statements. But I've generally had no trouble getting a hold of him. And as far as the whole card camera thing, that was a detail I didn't know. I hadn't heard that. Other people, I wasn't necessarily going to interview Eric for the oral history because he didn't cash in the main event that year or anything. But other people that I spoke to told me that he was the one guy. There were a lot of guys who were hesitant, but he was the one who really resisted. Told the ESPN 441 Productions people, if you put me at the feature table, I will cover my cards. You will not see them. And as Eric explained it to me, it wasn't that he didn't get it or that he didn't know how good this was for the game or how big this was going to be for the game. He knew all that. He appreciated all that. He respected all that. But he was just very uncomfortable showing the world his cards, showing people how they played. And he said it took him a few years after that before he started playing well when at a televised table, because it just was in his head, thinking about people seeing the things he was doing. It took him a while to get comfortable with that. But, fortunately that year, 441 Productions just kind of relented and listened to him and didn't bother to try to put him at the featured table, and he didn't go deep enough in the tournament for it to matter.
Very good. We got about 30 seconds left. List some of the other players that you interviewed, like Helmuth or Negreanu or some of the others.
Yeah, well, you just listed two of the biggest names, Helmuth and Negreanu, Mike Sexton, Harrington, of course, Greg Raymer, who won it the following year but did also play it in 2003.
Very
Sammy
good.
Farha.
And of 30 seconds. Thank you very much, Eric Raskin. Go out and hit lots of royal flushes, everybody. Good night.
You've been listening to Gambling with an Edge with your hosts Bob Dancer and Richard Munchkin. Subscribe to the show in iTunes, and episodes will be delivered to you automatically every week. Archived versions of past shows may be found at bobdancer.com and richardmunchkin.com. We welcome emails at gamblingwithanedge@gmail.com. Bob Dancer and Richard Munchkin are both available on Facebook and welcome your questions. The sponsors for the show are the South Point Hotel, Casino and Spa, the M Resort, the Palms Casino Resort, and the website videopoker.com. Join us again next week for another Gambling with an Edge.